Hi. Okay, so I'm busy on this, and there's a number of things that came up which I think are quite worthy of discussion. Okay, firstly, just in response to this, someone did make a comment about the seat looking a little bit high. So this resin cockpit was sort of mostly done and prepared, and it's not a great fit, and I seriously was not in the mood to sit struggling with that. I just filed enough to get it in. I did need to tweak one or two of the little topmost things off there to get the canopy to fit, and even while I've been messing around with it, these handles have been breaking off because it seems they are just resin as well, which I find very odd because that's about the most brittle and delicate things possible. So that seat's taken damage, that seat's taken damage. I'm just not interested in getting anything right about that. It just needs to go in and be closed off. As I say, it's hanging on the ceiling, and I'm not interested in fussing with getting cockpits right. And on the other two aircraft, I'm just using the kit cockpit. Resin cockpits are great if you're seriously into that kit and you want to put a lot of effort into getting it perfect there in front. So that's just in relation to that. And if something goes wrong and the cockpit doesn't want to close, then I'll just rip that seat out. I honestly don't want to fuss with that. When it's hanging up there and for 99% of its life, no one's going to see anything. Although I could actually mount this on the wall like that. Problem with a lot of the ceiling kits is you see so little of the aircraft. I am starting to go a little bit more for that wall-mounted display, which does look slightly odd because that's not a orientation that you normally see these aircraft in. So the focus of these three kits, these three Phantoms which someone gave up on, is just to do an interesting color scheme. That's all I care about. One in clean lines, one with stores, and one with undercarriage and everything down, dirty configuration. Right, there's a few things now. Okay, so it's this kit, and I don't know what the year is. There's many of these, you know, they produce the same kit in about, I don't know, five or more different box arts and slight variations, but it's all the same kit. I think it's 90s. It is recessed panel lines, and I'm guessing for that era it was a good kit. By today's standards, I regard this as only very average. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. If you had just gone ahead and glued all of the areas and pressed that together, you would have ended up with a fuselage that was too narrow for the gap that it needed to go into. So if you blindly go ahead and glue what you think should be glued, you may be presenting yourself with more problems later. So that's why there is currently a spacer there. The natural position, by the way, for this was slightly open. In fact, it looked just about like this. I've only put that in to give a bit of structural strength here. But I was about to look at gluing that area and deciding whether it should be pressed in, and then I test fitted it and saw that actually it was close to a good fit without trying to force that together. So that might be a very you know, an easy catch on a newer modeler who just decides to glue all areas that look like they should be glued, whereas you do need to cater for kit imperfections and inconsistencies. Part 2 of spreading this. Now, I've spoken in previous videos about putting in something stretched sprue when you don't have this flat section here to spread the fuselage so that it matches the shape there exactly. This one has got the flat sections, so either you cut out the flat sections completely so that you can put in stretched sprue and spread the fuselage. I don't think it's necessary in this case. It's close to correct, but what I do want to point out here is that having this angle iron, essentially, this you know, you've got a slab side and a slab bottom, which means you can't force out this area and not be forcing out that area. Basically, everything that you force out, the whole area just gets forced out because it's such a strong angle iron, essentially. I would have liked a little bit more out here, but it's not going to press out just that area. So when I put this in, there is a little bit of an area that I would have liked out on that wing. This one's not too bad, it's getting there. At the leading edges it's about correct, and at the trailing edges it's about correct. So what I want to say about that is if you force the fuselage out in some way over here, you're going to end up pushing it out over there and over there. And what's going to happen is when you then slot it in, it's going to force this a bit apart and it's going to start giving you anhedral. And you really need to watch out for that. You don't want to change your basic shape. And once you've done that, that's a very, very difficult thing to tweak afterwards. So at this point, it is not putting, I'm hoping it's not putting undue pressure on the lead, on that little area, on both sides. I don't think so. Giving a slight bit of up pressure on the wings would make a touch there a little bit more, and when I glue it, I will see if I can adjust that. But that's not worth filler, and it's not worth spreading for. It is worth paying more attention during your gluing, so that basically I am going to get, do you see that? I've basically reduced that just by pressing that. So what will happen is as it's gluing, you're putting a slight bit of pressure upwards on the wings and trying to get it to just touch that fuselage, and then when you release the pressure with your hands, it'll just settle back to its normal, but it'll be attached. Which I will do shortly. Oh, right, okay, so this was the first aircraft that I got, which did have the wing halves glued together. And as I was fitting it onto the fuselage, I noticed something which, okay, so you see that little section, which is that going into there. I noticed that on one side, I was just seeing a bit of that part there. And I couldn't figure out why I would be having a bad fit on one side and a better fit on the other side, till I realized that, you see this join, you see that? That's good. That's the way it's supposed to be. That is not designed to touch anything. Could be regarded as a bit of a fault of Hasiga, or let's say they could improve it so that it would touch a little bit of a raised surface on the bottom there to give a more sturdy wing. But anyway, nevertheless, that's the way it is, which means that when you fit the fuselage on that side, all good. But on this side, the person had pressed in, and I spoke about that in a video, they obviously used a clamp and glued with super glue. So they'd actually glued that to touch the bottom of the wing. I had to force and break that up and put a piece of plastic in to spread it because it didn't even want to release there properly. So that I now have roughly the same, and now when you put it into position, you are not seeing that, you are just not seeing that little triangle of shape there on that side or on that side. So fix that. Lesson is for people, I think, that are maybe not that experienced on what happens if you just clamp your wings. Don't just go and clamp your wings on, on a surface. There are places where the plastic must touch plastic, right at the trailing edge, or wherever this one sort of halfway through the flap area. So you put your clamps only there and none on the leading edge, because the leading edge doesn't have any facility for that. Your clamps will slip off, which means you're going to sit there with your fingers and just make sure that that's right. So inevitably on this aircraft, the one wing is a bit thinner because it has been clamped down a bit too much. And it's settled like that. And also they're glued with super glue. I don't think you should be gluing large surface ever with super glue. I think that is a very big mistake to, and I'm sure I'll, there'll people who will argue with me greatly. Is my statement is, don't glue large structure surfaces with super glue. There's no need to do that. And super glue is the wrong glue for that. Styrene glue welds plastic together, and super glue does not. So from a restoration point of view, it's better for me when people use super glue because it makes breaking it apart easier. But if you're building your models nicely, don't use super glue for that. Super glue has its purposes. They're for dissimilar materials and for small items with low contact area to get greater adhesion. You can often get the same with styrene glue, but that's about where I'd say where you're looking at using super glue. Not to mention the fact that the super glue can give you the fumes which then collect on some surfaces. Anyway, so this is what I've learned today. One wing was squashed. I broke the bond. I saw it was super glued. I've fixed that. The spreading, the fact that Hasegawa would have a join that if you followed that exactly, you'd end up with more of a problem joining your wings. You'd have more fillet gap, root gap. I might just tweak in a little bit of an extra bit of something there to give a slight bit more outward pressure for what it's worth. It's probably just another little piece like this. Okay, if you didn't want to have, if you really wanted to be able to spread individually, cut off. There's no big deal there. Just cut that off, scribe it off. Not a difficult task, but you do have to get it close to the end, otherwise you're still essentially sitting with an angle, just less of an angle, being plastic that is at that angle, which is very difficult to deform like that. What is happening there? Okay, I might need to adjust that little area. I'm going to put on that door. It looks like that door doesn't actually, that one fits in okay, but it looks like that one doesn't, but it's going to be what it's going to be. That little area needs a bit of filling there. Okay, regarding how I glued the fuselage together, this whole tail area needed to get together in a nice fashion. I'm not mad about the way Hasegawa handled things like this by just putting the arrestor hook and numerous other items. You'll notice I've taken off many of the aerials. I find that highly annoying to have to build and sand a fuselage when they've left all of their, including those two over here, pitos, I'm guessing, sticking out. So I just clean it up completely. And since this is not meant to be a perfectionistic build, don't care. But even the arrestor hook is really annoying being there. There's no reason for them to have done that. Separate molding, what's the big deal? But anyway, so I have to put glue on the inside, tube glue, because this is somewhat of a large area, and it's pretty easy to put tube glue into there. And then I completely ignore this whole area, completely ignore all of that. And okay, the nose cone wasn't on, obviously. And then this, you could address this afterwards, but I did put a bit of glue there, and there. That was it. So I've put glue on the nose. I'm now just holding the nose section together, getting that right. And I'm then pressing the tail area together. Being careful not to touch squeezed out glue. I got very minimal squeezed out glue. I did make one slight little touch of glue, but I cleaned that up very quickly. Sit there making sure that that's all good, especially that trailing edge. Really paying attention, putting a little bit more of thin glue into the trailing edge, pressing it down, making sure that these two little halves of that are nicely aligned. There is a slight bit of a glue squeeze out underneath the arrestor hook, which I will address, but I can't get to that. Cleaned up that area, making sure that that touched nicely. So that's good. That's a good join there. I don't have the best of joins there. I think I would like to, there's a bit of a step, so I'd like to fix that. The door, you know, again, they haven't really planned for people to do it undercarriage up. It's okay, it'll work. It's better than a lot of kits, but it's far from perfect. I'm going to have to put something in there because there's just about nothing for that one to mount onto. This one was sort of okay. I put the nose cone on to give it then that structural strength at the front. That had already glued, but still, just putting that on. I then, now that and that was done, now I could start, and I needed to press that. Put thin glue in there from the top. Put excess a little bit in the bottom. Put some tube glue in there, and then this was able to move very easily there. So it's very easy to have made a mess of that. So you've got to sort of press it there, but also be watching that up down movement, and sit there for quite a while it slowly glues together. And then as it's gluing together, I'm taking a little, I'm feeling it a little bit. This is now after the glue's not present, otherwise I'd be touching glue onto the surface. Taking my 600 sandpaper, probably giving it a little light sand just to see that I'm actually equally sanding off each side. Again, tweaking it. It still moves somewhat freely, not freely. It is possible to upset what you've just proven to be good. So you need to sort of make sure you're happy with it. Carry on holding. Don't do uneven pressure. Check it again. Carry on pressing it. Make sure that's right. Make sure that's right. Carry on pressing it. Quite a process. And within half an hour, and gradually a little bit more sanding with the 600, and then a pretty good join. In accordance with the level of accuracy and problems that already exist on this kit, as I've said in previous videos, there's not much point in paying attention to a perfect seam line there, as long as it'll look nice on the final paint job. So it does look to me like it would be worth a little bit of filler. You know, it's looking pretty good, but it's worth putting in a little bit of filler there. Right, now we get to the intakes. Now remember, the intakes were glued on early on. So now you've got this problem. Do you see that? See it better upside down. So the light is catching the fact that the wing is not aligning with that intake, which means that the intakes could have been glued a little bit lower. There's a bit of a step there as well. So that proves to me that those intakes had a little bit of play. And so I was just looking in here. Did they actually recommend that you glue them on so early? And yes, they did. They put that right in step, after you've got the cockpit, they put that at that step there. Get your intakes on. And what I'm saying there is, well, obviously that's not great because you didn't have anything to align to well enough at that point. If your intakes didn't have an absolute perfect fitting, now the end result is you've got a step later on when you get to the wings. What is my suggestion? Don't necessarily follow the steps. There was no reason for you having just gone ahead with the intakes at that point. Could you have put them on after the wings? Well, is there a bit of overlap? So if I take that off there, does the wing overlap the intake? It does not. Sorry, it does. It does overlap the intake a little bit. Could you have still achieved that? Yes, you could. You could still slot the intake in, or alternatively, you could be ready to put the wings on, judging and not have put the intakes on, then test fit your intakes and judge what sort of gap you get there and what sort of step you get there. And then if the fit was not perfect, adjust the mounting lugs or whatever the steps inside the intake and position so that you've got a smooth flow on top, a smooth fit at the bottom, and getting it into the wing joint there at the same time. I wouldn't have glued the intakes on so early, not to mention that, of course, you've got a problem of painting right in there, so that's where I'd be painting parts before putting them on, as I did. Okay, last thing. So I did paint that yesterday, so we've got that painted, but I was just looking at that and noting, well, okay, it's a bit of a nuisance having a blank off in your intake. If you didn't like that, just open that up actually on the kit, and I think I might do that on the other two. So what that means is when you look into the intake, you'll be looking straight into the fuselage, and there's nothing really there. If you wanted to create the illusion of the beginning of an engine, you could easily build in a little something from scrap that looks like that, which would be better than these blank areas, so that when you look into it, you see black. Now, of course, it's shining up now because I used a gloss. I could matte that, but still, it's quite an easy change before you've put these intakes on, and before you've even glued fuselage halves, to take those off, and I'll show that when I do that on the other kit. Now, it's not to say people go and sit there and look down your intakes, but it's a fairly easy thing to do a little bit of better impression. But the same with the exhausts. As I said, I might try that by not actually fitting the end of the engines onto the end of the pipe. Give it a little bit more depth, because when you look down the pipe, you're not even going to notice. We'll see how that turns out. I'm just speculating here, but both the view from the back and the view in the front can be improved by very minimal methods. Yes, last thing. Okay. Now, remember in a video I spoke about pinning, especially horizontal stabilizers, such that the horizontal stabilizer on one side will pin into the one on the other side and give you a nice strong join. Well, not on the Phantom it's not, because you have got a angle downwards such that I can't, there's no plastic thickness for me to get a pin in at that angle. I could get a little bit of a pin in if it was straight, and I could actually bend that. Might give that a bit of a thought. Now this is really a very little pin that they've got there. It's almost only a positioning pin, which means that the idea at this point on this model is that the glue joint to the fuselage is basically the only thing that's going to be holding that in position. And if I hold this up against the light, which you won't see there, you know, to judge how the touching area is, what the actual contact area is, it's almost really only touching very well on that little circular area, which is the horizontal stabilizer adjustment, all-flying tailplane. Obviously that's adequate because most people build their kits like that. It's not the strongest. Do I think it's worth putting in a steel rod? Not really. So I'm probably going to go with the gluing, but it does make the horizontal stabilizers of the weakest points. You know, you bump that and it might take that joint off, but we'll do it on this one. So I just need to decide on a nice level flight positioning, but it does give you the option for a bit of variation there. Actually, now that I think about it, on this arrestor hook, you don't need to leave it the way the kit gave it to you. You could take that arrestor hook off without a hell of a lot of problem. You'd have to saw a little piece off there and a little piece off there, and maybe at the edge. It would be possible for you to actually, and I would have suggested that, remove that arrestor hook, paint it up separately, and I will do that on the other two kits. Right, so now if some of you have been pondering, well, what about all the aerials that I took off if I was going to do a more perfectionistic model on this? What I might have considered if I wanted all of those aerials is I would sort of note the size, note the positions, and remake them afterwards, and make, so after I've sanded and filled and paint, even all the painting done, everything, I put aerials back in position, little scratch built aerials. I have tried to sand and fill around all the aerials, but I mean, I don't regard that as great work. I'm not happy with the results that I achieve, because you inevitably end up with a visible imperfection around each aerial where there was sanding to the left of it, sanding to the right of it. Yeah. Now this one will look very, very good when it's finished. And I have been giving thought, I was talking about doing one of them in a Reno scheme. This one is a gloss blue. It's a standard scheme. I haven't got the box art here. It's not that picture that I held up right now. But you can take those basic schemes. So I can use that gloss blue, and I can do a little bit of extra. I can do an extra bit of decoration on the wings, which I might well do. So I'll take one of the three and do a full Reno scheme. I'll take another one and do something interesting, and this one will be close to the box art but with a bit of extra and using the decals. So I'll just make up three interesting schemes that'll look really nice put on the wall. The one with undercarriage down and full stores on it, that one might be a nice one to hang from the ceiling because you're looking at all of the area of most detail. Or I might even hang at eye level somewhere, we'll see. Okay, before this gets too long, cheerio, happy modeling.